Dan Hussett, it's great to talk to you today. We've had the pleasure of working together over the years, um, both as partners on projects in the agency world, and I'm always interested in what you're working on. So I wanted to get with you today and talk a little bit about Gravity AI. But first, for the people that don't know you, why don't you give us a little bit of your background, the San Diego life, agency world. I know you've been an expert product manager and an entrepreneur, so give us a little background in terms of how that's all rolled out for you.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. It's super exciting to be doing these interviews, and I'm obviously really excited about the new venture. You have a quote about me that I always love. Growing up in San Diego, you used to say that I've got that West Coast chill with the East Coast work ethic. I've done a really good job of fooling you with that work ethic, but definitely got that West Coast vibes going on. But yeah, I started out in the West Coast here, working in digital strategy and digital analytics and marketing. I did my agency run for a while at some of the largest agencies in the world, and quickly shifted, having worked within the context of digital strategy, into building more formalized products, not just websites and digital strategy, but actual products that people are using, from a stint in ad tech, to building out my own analytics practice, to building out most recently with Boston Consulting Group, and then again with State Street Corporation, a true AI mobile product, which was very exciting and helped lead me to the conclusion that I should build what I'm building today.
So one of the things I've really liked about you, and you've taught me a lot along the way, is this entrepreneur mindset. We've talked about books like Just Start in the past. How has that kind of informed everything you've done? We met through Digitaria. Like you said, you were in the agency game for a while. You saw a gap there in terms of the margin that was happening or wasn't happening. And then you really followed your passion in terms of digging deeper into products, especially that could really drive some interesting outcomes through State Street and so forth. So why don't you talk a little bit about some of those products that you built, at State Street, for instance, and then I know you've had other startups too. You've had a salsa business. You've had all kinds of fun stuff. How has this kind of informed you with the founding of Gravity AI? Because what I love about this thinking is it's very iterative, right? It's very evolutionary, and you're always learning. So how do you respond to that kind of approach?
Well, you mentioned the book Just Start, which is one of my favorite books. In Just Start, it talks about, for example, how children are asked the question at a very young age, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the book says that that's the silliest or stupidest question you could ask a child, obviously very tongue-in-cheek, but it's because a child at that age is being asked this super meaty question with life implications, with very little knowledge, with deep uncertainty about how the future is going to play out. So asking a 5-year-old what they want to be when they grow up is a bit crazy, because they're acting with, very, very uncertain knowledge about the future. And that kind of mindset, that planning is appropriate when you have a reasonable expectation of what that plan is going to turn into versus how to deal with uncertainty, has been a major driving force for me in terms of how I think about the world. And you used a quote just now, which is one of my favorites, which is about loving the problem, not the solution. And that's really a product manager's job. That alone has been really what has informed my decision about what products to build and how to build them, what companies to start. So one of my favorites that I've ever started was HotSauceAdventureClub.com, which you mentioned, which was, I noticed a couple trends that were happening in the market. First, hot sauce was the fastest growing condiment in the world by leaps and bounds. This was 10 years ago. And there was a major trend of the month clubs happening. And there was no specific just hot sauce of the month club at that time. And so I decided to do that. I launched Hot Sauce Adventure Club, built that business into delivering thousands and thousands of bottles of hot sauce per month. And it was extremely fun. And, that came from the fact that, you recognize these individual trends and, the type of problems that people have, which is that at that time that they wanted to experience all sorts of varieties of hot sauce. Craft hot sauces were taking off. And that type of thinking informed, my entire career. And most recently, before starting Gravity AI, I carried that over to Boston Consulting Group's digital ventures team, and then again at State Street, where over the course of my career there, State Street was my client at BCG. I was building a true AI mobile product that used natural language processing to read financial news and then connect that financial news intelligently back to an individual set of portfolio holdings and surface contextualized and relevant analytics, and then ultimately rank that news on its importance. That's a major challenge, not just from a data science standpoint, but from a product development standpoint, in terms of really understanding what problem we're solving and not getting hooked on any one solution.
So let's drill into that a little bit, because I think this is a new paradigm for people. And I know that you've learned a lot and you present on this again. What's the problem that you're willing to love, and how does that motivate you when you get up in the morning?
I actually lived through this problem, so I felt the pain associated with it while I was at State Street building that AI mobile product. The story that I love to tell is about an occurrence where we should have been able to access an AI product, a third-party data science product, with ease that we weren't necessarily able to access. So at that time, we were ingesting an enormous amount of financial news. And that financial news, again, we read through natural language processing, and it connected back to portfolio holdings. And, occasionally, something like an article about Justin Bieber would slip through. And not about Justin Bieber, starting a hedge fund. This was just spam. So we recognized the need for a spam filter on the news. And spam, as far as a data science problem is concerned, is completely solved, right? So you have a spam filter in your email. It's not a difficult data science problem. And in fact, we found very well-performing open source versions of spam filters. But in large enterprise companies, for many reasons, open source technologies are banned from a production environment. Certainly without going through massive vetting process, but most of them just ban them outright. So we didn't get to use those open source technologies. Fine, whatever, that's okay. My product manager hat was on. I said, all right, we need the spam filter. Let's find a third-party vendor. This isn't something that we should build. So we found a third-party vendor, small little shop, and we spent 3 weeks getting them cleared through security. No problem, good to go. And then it turns out that it was going to take 18 months for that vendor to get through procurement. And that is a little bit extreme as far as enterprise is concerned, but not unheard of. Oftentimes you hear stories about how it takes a very long time for vendors to get through procurement and security. Well, I think I threw a chair that day. I was like, just let me do my job, let me build my product. And, ultimately what we had to have happen was we had to have my very expensive and talented data scientist spend 3 months of his time solving an already solved problem. And I recognized that the scale at which large enterprise companies need to get access to different data science solutions is very high. But the ability for them to get access to those solutions is very, very low and obviously very slow. So ultimately what happens is that many of them build these more types of commoditized algorithms or or models that have been solved previously over again from scratch when they don't need to build them internally. And worse yet, nearly 9 out of 10 of those internal builds tend to fail for all sorts of reasons.
Wow. So it sounds like speed to market is one big issue that you're talking about, right? But it's also on a basic level kind of just efficiency, like this crazy internal system that exists, like you said, for lots of reasons, many times security and other things that are driving that, right? But the problem in your mind, if I'm hearing you correctly, is why can't we get to this solution faster and smarter? and allow it to be us to be working on things that are more important and more of a value add for the actual enterprise. Is that fair?
That's 100% fair. Data scientists are a scarce resource. Last statistics I saw show that there were 4 times the number of open data science recs jobs than there are actual data scientists. And that gap seems to be actually growing, not shrinking, despite there being large numbers of data science graduates. So they're a scarce resource. They tend to be a very expensive resource. So you need them to be spending their time on your most proprietary problems as a business, using your proprietary data, not spending their time rebuilding solved problems on data sets that have been widely available or public. And this is getting at the heart of the problem, which is there's a shift now that is happening in terms of how we need, as organizations, to think about build versus buy when it comes to data science. For the first time, really, data science has gotten to this level of maturity where just like the web went into Web 2.0 and now Web 3.0, we've entered data science 2.0, where there's this level of maturity that makes it so that you can go access these third-party solutions, but organizations aren't structured to work with a fragmented market like this, and the third-party vendors don't have necessarily the built-in requirements from a security standpoint, a standardization standpoint, and documentation standpoint that enterprise needs. So the problem is, how do large enterprise get hooked up with these very, very talented smaller vendors who have these great solutions at some sort of scale?